I was there when they killed him. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just watched, like she did. Hephaestion died in front of the throne. No trial. No sentence. Just a short moment of silence, and then his knees hit the stone floor. I was standing behind the drapes, not by accident. I'd followed him that morning. I didn't know he wouldn't come back. He didn't even scream. That part still bothers me. You'd expect someone to scream when they die. But he just dropped. The queen was already standing there. Queen Marguerite. She didn't say a word either. She just watched him collapse and didn't move, not even a step. Her face didn't change. Not until she looked toward the king, Alexander, and then back at the wall where I was hiding. I thought she looked straight through it. Maybe she saw me, maybe not, I don't know, but I saw her. I was 10 years old. And that was the day I stopped asking about my father. My name is Edric. That's not the name I was born with, just the name I was allowed to keep. I was raised in the outer garrison near the river, in the care of an old man who said nothing unless it was about training or punishment. I was told my mother died during the siege of Duras. I was told nothing about my father, but people talked when they thought I wasn't listening. They said the king had a favorite. They said he was too close to power, too close to the throne. And one day, the queen solved the problem. No one said it outright, but I knew. I was the problem she didn't finish. I kept my head down. I trained harder than the others. I learned how to stay invisible, how to speak like a soldier and think like a servant. I made myself useful. I earned my place in the palace guard, not because I wanted to be near power, but because I wanted to understand how they moved, how they spoke, how they decided who lives and who disappears. Then one day, a young scribe, barely more than a boy, pulled me aside during a shift and showed me a page. It was a copy of an old registry from the royal archives. Faded ink, burn marks on the edge. One line stood out, Hephaestion deceased. One unnamed male heir, date sealed. He smiled like he'd just found a lost coin. 2 days later, he disappeared. No trial, no funeral, no body. I knew what that meant, so I went back to the archive. I tried to find the page. It was gone, but I knew what I saw. And more than that, I knew they knew I saw it too. The next morning, I received an order. Reassignment to the Royal Tomb Guard. No explanation. Just a scroll with a wax seal and a look from the captain that told me not to ask questions. That night, I walked past the royal crypt. The king's tomb stood polished and guarded. Fresh flowers, gold leaf. To the left, there was an empty space where Hephaestion was supposedly buried. No name, no marker, just dirt. That was when it hit me. They didn't just kill my father. They erased him. No grave, no memory. No truth. And me, I was still here, still serving them, still pretending I didn't exist. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. But something broke that night. Quietly, not like a scream. More like a bone shifting under skin, out of place, but not yet broken. Not yet. I didn't know what I would do next. I only knew this. If they had killed him a second time, it would have been through me, through my silence. And I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. I guarded the tomb of the king who let my father die, and I did it with pride. That's how far silence can take you. Into uniforms, into orders, into forgetting who you are. I didn't resist. I served. And every night I stood there, right next to the grave they never marked for him. I didn't act immediately. I kept working, kept showing up to formation on time. kept my armor polished and my mouth shut. That's how you survive in the palace. I'd been doing it my whole life, even after finding the page, even after they reassigned me to tomb detail. I told myself it didn't matter, that if I waited long enough, served long enough, someone might give me answers. Or even just acknowledgement, a glance, a word, something. But silence was the only reward I got, and I knew it well. My post was beneath the royal mausoleum. Cold stone, no windows. The only sounds were footsteps and water dripping from the ceiling. The tomb of King Alexander sat at the center, grand, gold-lined, surrounded by holy symbols and guards with hands on hilts. And to the side, behind a locked iron gate, was a patch of ground no one entered. No prayers, no incense, no plaque. That was where they said Hephaestion had been buried. I stood there every night, torch in hand, watching nothing move. That place wasn't just forgotten, it was erased on purpose. There was a time when I believed in all of it. The kingdom, the throne, the rituals. As a boy, I used to sneak onto the palace steps during feast days just to see the royal procession. When Alexander passed, people would drop to their knees like they were seeing God. I was one of them. I thought loyalty would protect me. I thought if I followed the rules, if I made myself smaller, more disciplined, more obedient, I'd be accepted. Even if no one knew who I was, I became a soldier. I served in border patrol, in the stables, in the kitchens, in the barracks. I buried the king's dogs. I cleaned the blades of his personal guard. Once, during a winter blizzard, I stood 13 hours outside his chamber door while his courtiers laughed and drank inside. And I took pride in that, because I thought it meant something. One evening, during a feast of remembrance for the king's fallen generals, I stood near the gates of the Hall of Valor. A scribe read out names. Soldiers bowed their heads. He didn't say Hephaestion, not even once. I stood in full uniform among the others and felt nothing. Not anger, not shock. Just the hollow understanding that this wasn't a mistake. They weren't forgetting him. They were removing him. And by standing there in silence, I was helping them do it. After the ceremony, an old guard came to me. I don't even know his name. He'd seen me before, years ago. Maybe he knew who I was. He leaned in, lowered his voice, and said, "You know why she hated him, don't you? It wasn't because he had the king's heart. It was because she couldn't make the king look at her the way he looked at your father." Then he walked away. No threats. No warnings, just that. I didn't sleep that night. Again. I stayed at my post, alone in front of the empty grave. It wasn't just grief anymore, or shame. It was something slower, like a rot beneath the skin. I thought about what I'd done all these years, how many things I had cleaned, guarded, and protected for the very people who spit on his memory. I had spent my life trying to be useful to the system that erased him. And maybe that was my greatest mistake. But even then, I still wasn't ready to break the silence. Not yet. They didn't demote me. They didn't accuse me. They just removed my name from the roster like I was never part of it. No Excel, no cell. Just a silence so clean it scraped me out of history. I wasn't dragged out. I walked out myself with a folded reassignment scroll tucked under my armor. There was no trial, no accusations, no confrontation, but I wasn't blind. The week after the scribe vanished, a new order was issued to restructure the internal guard. Names were quietly moved around, titles adjusted. When I checked the new roll posted outside the barracks, my name wasn't there. Not crossed out, not marked for transfer, just gone. I asked the captain. He looked at me like I'd asked about a ghost. Then he handed me a sealed letter and said, "You've been assigned to the monastery garrison at Valcross, effective immediately. You'll serve as internal guard, strict protocol, no questions. No crest on the seal, no sender's name." I opened the scroll later that night. It didn't say dismissal. It didn't say anything about why. Just 3 words at the bottom, written in a hand I didn't recognize. Silence is loyalty. Valcross wasn't a reassignment. It was a disappearance. The monastery was once a royal summer retreat, long abandoned after the last war. Now it housed what they called the Order of Retired Service, men who had outlived their usefulness, women who had seen too much, clerics who had rewritten one too many names. It was where the court sent people they didn't want to kill, just unremember. The gate was rusted shut when I arrived. Inside there were no candles, no heat. Only long stone halls, the smell of damp wood, and the constant drone of wind hitting the stained glass windows. I was told I would be in charge of record maintenance. There were no records. Only crates full of broken wax seals, torn decrees, and pages missing names. At the back of the monastery, I found a chamber with blank marble tablets stacked against the wall. Some had traces of letters, clearly sanded down. Others were untouched, waiting for names that would never be carved. My uniform was taken, replaced with a grey robe. My sword was removed, replaced with a dull iron key. I slept in a narrow cell beside a chapel no one prayed in. Every morning a bell rang. Every evening I lit a candle for no one in particular. Once, during inventory, I found a box labeled Disputed Figures. Inside, half-burnt scrolls, one blackened ring, and a broken crest with the sigil of House Hephaestion, scratched so deep you could see the bone-white stone underneath. That was when I realized something cruel. It wasn't enough to kill a man. Not even enough to forget him. They had to erase him so thoroughly that anyone tied to him vanished too, and I was next. The other guards didn't speak, some by choice. Others had been here so long they simply forgot how. No one asked questions, not even when I screamed one night in my sleep, shouting my father's name for the first time out loud. I expected someone to come. No one did. The worst part wasn't being silenced. It was knowing I had helped build the silence. For years, I stood at attention while people like me disappeared behind doors that never reopened. I cleaned the blood. I memorized the orders, and I never once thought it would happen to me. But now it had. No parade, no prison, no last chance to defend myself, just a box with no name, and a room no one entered. They didn't bury me, but they made sure nothing I touched ever left a mark. No name, no post, no prayer. I wasn't a man anymore. I was a shadow the walls stopped recognizing. I stayed at Valcross for 13 months. That's what the records say. But it felt like time stopped the day I arrived. The monastery was too old to be sacred and too new to be forgotten. Its walls were made of black stone, cold and always damp. Moss grew where saints' faces had once been carved. Rats moved in silence. Candles had to be relit every few hours or the corridors would vanish into dark. They gave me no duties beyond observation. No one explained what that meant. So I spent my days wandering the halls, opening doors that led nowhere, and tracing the same steps along the gravel courtyard until the soles of my boots tore open. I kept thinking someone would come. A letter, a visitor, a mistake. No one came. There were others, of course. Men like me, uniforms stripped, titles gone. Some muttered to themselves in corners. Some refused to speak at all. One of them used to serve as steward to Queen Marguerite. Now he spent his days lining up broken spoons in the dirt and saluting them like soldiers. I asked him once what he remembered. He said nothing, just held out a piece of bone and whispered. They told me to forget, so I did, but the bone didn't. I started writing in secret, not letters, not memoirs, just names, on the back of loose parchment, on the underside of broken benches, behind stones that no one moved. I wrote Hephaestion, Edric, unnamed, loyal, forgotten. Every few nights I'd check. The words were still there, but faded, as if the air itself was rubbing them out. I tried scratching them into stone with my belt buckle. That worked better. But the walls bled dust when I did. Everything here was designed to decay, even memory. There were meals twice a day. Thin soup, dried roots, sometimes barley soaked in vinegar. I wasn't starved, but I wasn't fed. Each bowl came without a name. You ate what you got. You returned what you didn't touch. And no one looked at anyone else, ever. We slept in stone cells. No locks, no doors, just cold. The kind of cold that sank into bone and stayed there even in daylight. I stopped dreaming. Then I started seeing my father in the walls, not as a ghost, but as a silence. The part of the monastery no one walked through, the corridor everyone skipped. I sat there some nights, trying to remember the shape of his face. But the more I tried, the more I realized I was forgetting too. I once found a mirror in the old chapel, cracked, covered in grime, half silvered. I cleaned it slowly, piece by piece, not because I wanted to see myself, but because I wasn't sure I still had a face. When I was done, I looked. What stared back was tired, pale, eyes hollowed. I whispered my name aloud, Edric. And the mirror didn't answer. The walls didn't echo. The candle behind me flickered, as if embarrassed to still be burning. That night I scratched the name deeper into the chapel wall, so that even if I died, something would still know I had once stood there. Time didn't pass in Valcross. It dissolved, and I dissolved with it, not all at once. Not with fire or blade, just with every silent day, every forgotten night, every time someone walked past me without seeing me. And the worst part, I let them, because by then I believed I deserved it. The silence had swallowed everything, but something in me kept coughing it back up. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was memory. Memory that refused to rot quietly. It started with a drawer. A rusted, half-broken thing tucked behind a loose stone panel in the lower archive hall. I wasn't looking for it. I had dropped a candle. That's all. Bent down, reached too far, and felt the edge of something that didn't belong. Inside. A torn page, a chipped seal, a folded letter sealed shut with wax the color of dried blood. There was no name, no date, but I knew the handwriting. I had only seen it once, on a torn crest, before they destroyed it. The loops, the slant, the careful ink stroke. This was Hephaestion's hand, I didn't open it, not that day, not for weeks. I hid it beneath a floor tile under my cot. Each night I would reach for it and stop. Because some part of me, after all this time, still believed reading it would get me killed. The monastery never checked our cells, not officially, but the shadows moved. Footsteps came at odd hours. And once I found a hairline cut in the corner of my blanket, perfectly straight, like someone had searched it and put it back too carefully. I told myself I was imagining it, that no one cared who I was anymore. But I stopped sleeping, not from fear, from awakening. For the first time in years I was thinking again, not about survival, but about consequence, about history, about what it means when a man dies and the world is ordered to forget him. I started gathering what I could. Fragments, whispers, the old steward who lined up spoons. He had names scratched under each one, the names of nobles who vanished the same year Hephaestion died. A former maid in the corner tower had sewn pieces of royal linens into the hem of her robe, hidden crests, secret initials. There were others like me, not many, not loud, but awake, holding onto pieces of a world that no longer existed, but shouldn't have been erased. One night, I lit a candle under the chapel crypt and opened the letter. There were only 4 lines. If you find this, it means the words survived me. Tell no one, keep no monument, but remember who I loved, and that he looked back when they took me away. That was it. No anger, no accusation, just memory. A private truth, not for revenge, just to be remembered. And that broke something in me, not the way stone breaks, more like a rope fraying, quietly but with purpose. Because I realized if they killed him for who he loved, and buried me to keep that love unspoken, then silence wasn't safety. Silence was compliance, and I had complied long enough. The next day I began carving, not poems, not messages, just names, on the underside of the pews, inside the candle holders, on the back of holy icons that no one touched anymore. Hephaestion, Edric, Marguerite, Alexander, the boy who vanished, the scribe, the steward, the maid, not in full, just letters, dates, symbols, a map of omission. So that if anyone looked close enough, they'd see the story they tried to erase, still alive, still bleeding. And still I said nothing, not yet, because I knew in places like this, words are knives. You only use them once, and only when you're ready to bleed with them. But I was sharpening mine, slowly, patiently, letting them echo in the stone before I ever let them touch air. They gave me silence. I gave them memory, one word at a time until it bled through the walls. I never escaped Valcross. I was sent away, not as a man reformed, but as a thing repurposed. The king's envoy visited under false names, false robes, said the order needed men of reliable silence to aid in state clerical service. The abbot nodded. The steward signed. My hands were bound not by rope, but by obligation. They gave me a new name, a set of scrolls, and sent me to Greyfort Court, the fortress where the Queen once held court, now a decaying administration hall in the hills. I was to assist in cataloguing closed family lines. That's what they said, but I knew what it meant. They were erasing people, line by line, family by family, and they needed someone who wouldn't ask why. But I had been preparing for this. Every night in the chapel, every name carved into stone, every whisper hidden in ink and wax. This was not exile, this was entry. At Greyfort, I worked silently for weeks. They trusted me quickly, too quickly. Because silence, it turns out, is more frightening than questions. They gave me access to sealed archives, burial records, marriage scrolls, execution warrants dressed up as tax disputes, and I found them, one after another. The official decree stripping Hephaestion of title, dated 2 weeks after his death. A forged report of his suicide, signed by Alexander. A death certificate for a child with no name, no mother, no father, dated my birthday. That was me. They had buried me in ink before I even had the chance to die. So I wrote my own version, on parchment, on ash, on skin if I had to, a full record with dates, cross-referenced seals and coded signatures. I signed it not as Edric, but with the symbol carved in every candle base in Valcross. A broken crown with no flame. And when the time came, I sent it, not to a noble, not to a court, but to the archivist of the free cities, the only power outside the kingdom that still kept unfiltered annals. I didn't expect reply. Only ripple, but a ripple is enough in a place that fears waves. 2 months later, Greyfort's eastern tower burned. They blamed a candle, said a clerk died in the blaze, but I wasn't in that tower, because I knew the flame was coming. And by then I had already vanished, with the only surviving copy of the documents sealed in wax and buried in a mason's pouch. I didn't run far, just to the outskirts, where rumors breathe. And there in candlelit cellars and war-torn taverns I began to speak, not loudly, not publicly, but clearly, to the right ears. I found others, children of the erased, monks who had seen too much. A noble's widow who had kept her husband's broken signet as proof of silence. And I told them, you don't need to scream. You only need to remember and write it down. They can't burn what they can't find. Eventually, the king's agents noticed. They came to question me under the name Elian. I answered as Elian. But when they left, I carved a new name into the underside of the stone bench I was chained to that night. Edric, son of the erased, witness of the forgotten, keeper of the truth. And I smiled, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't just alive. I was louder than the silence they feared most. They didn't summon me for justice. They summoned me to die with dignity. But the truth didn't come to beg. It came to accuse. They found me at dawn, not with swords, but with parchment, sealed in black wax, the color used only for closed trials. No trial was ever announced publicly. No procession, no crowd. Just 5 riders and a carriage lined in cold iron. I was not bound, but they placed a hood over my head, not for my sake, but theirs. They wanted no one to see the face of the dead man returning. The trial chamber lay beneath Argent Hall, where kings were once crowned. Now it reeked of mold and something worse, something that lingered in the walls. The smell of history kept too long in chains. 3 judges, 12 observers, none with names, no public recorders, no heralds. This was not a courtroom. It was an execution with paperwork. They asked my name. I gave it. Edric, son of no crown, blood of Hephaestion. The room shifted, a sharp exhale. One judge's quill paused midair, then silence. They began listing the charges: treason, forgery, dissemination of false records, threat to the unity of royal history. I answered only once. The records are real. The blood is real. The silence you demand is not. They didn't expect me to defend. They expected me to beg, but I came armed. Not with allies or armies, with scrolls, dates, names, and the symbol carved beneath every sanctuary in the east, a crown snapped in two, a flame extinguished, the mark of the erased. One of the judges, an older man with cloudy eyes, spoke. "What are you hoping for, child of nothing? Redemption." I looked him in the eye. Not redemption, a reckoning. You burned his name from stone. I carved it into the bones of your churches. The room froze. Even the scribes didn't move. And I knew in that moment they could no longer pretend I hadn't existed. That night I wasn't taken back to a cell. I was moved quietly to a guest chamber. No chains, no guards, just a letter, unsigned. It read, "You will not be executed, but you will not be named. You will not be honored, but neither will you vanish. Let the silence decide." The next morning, the official decree was read in the courtyard. Not to a crowd, but to a single scribe. Edric, no longer enemy, no longer heir, a man outside time. I stood behind a pillar listening, not as a victor, not as a criminal, but as a witness. To the moment the kingdom chose to remember and to lie at the same time. Because truth, when spoken, doesn't always restore. Sometimes it merely haunts. As I left the courtyard, a boy pressed something into my hand. A broken candle holder. On the base, my name, carved in hurried strokes, next to another, Hephaestion. He looked up at me and whispered, "My father told me your story. He said it wasn't allowed, but he told me anyway." And that was more than a sentence. It was an inheritance. You can burn a man's name from history, but not from his son's bones. I wasn't raised to inherit a crown. I was raised to bury it and carry what couldn't be buried. I live in a nameless village now. No guards, no titles. Just wind and ash and fields that remember blood more than rain. They call me the quiet man, the gardener, the one who came from nowhere and never left. But they don't know that every herb I plant grows over a name the world tried to erase. That every time I touch the soil, I feel the bones of stories too dangerous to speak. There's no monument for Hephaestion, no grave for Edric, only silence and what survives beneath it. Inside my home, there's a single wooden box, worn, blackened by candle smoke. Inside I keep a broken seal from the court of Alexander, a nameplate chiseled off a tomb, and the final parchment they never let me read in court. A letter from Queen Marguerite, admitting what she did and why. She never said she was sorry. She only wrote, "He was a shadow that wouldn't leave my bedchamber." So I gave the torch to the king. I didn't keep it for revenge. I kept it so the story would have an ending. I used to think justice meant being seen, but now I know. Justice is being remembered by the right people and feared by the wrong ones. Each year a stranger knocks on my door, a priest's apprentice, a librarian, a bastard noble. They never say their names. They only ask, is it true what they say? That the kingdom tried to silence a son who remembered too much. I never answer with words. I show them the box, and I whisper, Hephaestion. If their hands don't shake, I don't trust them. Sometimes I write his name on leaves and toss them into the river. Sometimes I carve it into the bark of trees, deep enough to bleed sap. And sometimes, in the coldest months, I wake from dreams where the court still burns, and I'm 12 years old again, screaming his name through stone walls that do not echo back. But now, I speak it aloud, for myself, for him, for you, Hephaestion, not a general, not a lover, not a ghost, a man who dared to love in a time that punished love, who dared to be remembered by one who was never supposed to be born. You've heard my story, not from scrolls or scribes, but from what remained after the fire. Now I ask you, was I wrong to speak? Was silence nobler? Would you have survived the way I did, or died shouting your father's name? Leave your truth below, not for me, but for all the sons and daughters they tried to silence. Would you have kept the secret, or carved it into the bones of history like I did?